Hey guys, it's Kevin Games for The Flash, Season 1, Episode 20, The Trap. And oh my god, guys, why can't The Flash be like that every week? Seriously, this episode was amazing. I'm gonna tell you guys why it worked so well. It didn't focus on a metahuman. Now, as much as I like the story of Barry and, the regular Star Labs team catching metahumans, it's time. The show is above that at this point, honestly. The show has gotten so much more into the Wells aspect of the show that, honestly, at this point, the show is above that. Now, we do see why they had a metahuman in the episode last week, which honestly is a genius twist, and I have to say, I loved it, but this was by far the best episode of the season, and if the rest of the episodes this season are as intense and as crazy as this one, this is going to be an amazing final three episodes, because seriously, this episode was amazing. Let's get this episode because it was absolutely amazing, and I loved every single minute of it. I really did, and the thing about this episode as well is that every member had something to do. There wasn't anyone that was sidelined. There wasn't anyone that was like, I don't feel like I had enough to do. No, everyone had something to do. And also, Iris wasn't annoying, so that's great. So we start with Team Flash in the Reverse Flash's time vault, literally right where we left off last week. So of course they found out that, Wells is from the future and everything. They interface with Gideon. Now, Gideon is basically an AI, and I love that Cisco kept calling her Hal and kept, making nerdy references. I mean, just last week when we saw Cisco, nerd out over Black Canary, and this week when we saw Cisco nerd out because, Gideon reminded him of Hal, it's just little moments like that. That's one of the reasons why I love Cisco's character. So basically, they learn that Wells, but we do find out something here, that Wells came back in time to kill Barry, only because, killing Nora only because he was frustrated that young Barry got away. So they also see that the newspaper, this was really interesting, we see the newspaper is filled with references to future events, including a byline, and you know what that byline says? It's actually from Iris West Allen. So, yes, this is showing that at some point in the future, well, this future, at least, Iris and Barry do get married, and I thought that was really interesting that we saw that. And I know a lot of people don't really think they have a lot of chemistry, but we really have seen it coming the whole season, and honestly, the direction this episode went, I could definitely see it happening. And basically, they're nearly caught by Wells. They hear Wells coming, and basically, because Cisco actually had, a wheelchair tracker, and basically to track when Wells was coming, and they escape and convince Gideon not to tell him that they were even there. And Gideon's okay with it because Barry apparently invented Gideon, which I thought was really interesting that Barry invented. We also find out that Barry becomes the director of the CCPD, which I thought was really interesting. They also deduced that Wells allowed the particle accelerator to explode because he wanted Barry to become the Flash, and I just thought overall that was really interesting. We found out so much in just the first, 2 minutes, and I love that. I mean, there's no more questioning who Wells is. They know pretty much everything they need to know, and I know some people are they're rushing it, but honestly, no. We have 3 episodes left. There's no time to slow the story down. I love that this episode was just fuck slowing the story down. We're gonna go at full speed, and that was awesome. So, after they leave, Wells enters and Gideon tells him everything is fine, pretty much making it seem like nothing's wrong, and I thought that was really interesting overall. An awesome way to start the episode, and I love that. And it really sets the tone for this episode, because this episode is constant tension, and that was awesome. So at Jitters, Eddie talks to Joe and basically tells him that he actually plans to propose to Iris and asks for his blessing, and surprisingly, Joe refuses, and it might be because he thinks Barry's better for Iris. As we know, Joe doesn't really like Eddie, but Eddie does say that he doesn't really care what Joe thinks. He only did that because it's the right thing to do, which, yeah, it is the right thing to do. I mean, anyone who wants to marry their, girlfriend, if you ever want to do that, the right thing to do is to ask their father first. That's what you do. But, of course, Joe said no, and he doesn't really care, which I thought was really interesting. We saw that overall. And I have to say, I've said before, I really do like seeing Eddie and Iris together, especially recently. I've really started to appreciate them more as a couple. So at home, Barry reveals to the group that he time traveled, and I love that we saw this, because they're all talking about what's going on with Wells, and they talk about time travel, and how Wells is from the future, and they talk about how, one day Barry's going to go back into the future, but Barry does reveal, and I love that he told him this, that he reveals to the group that he actually did time travel during his fight with the weather wizard, and they figure out that maybe Cisco's dreams are a manifestation of the alternate timeline, because they're thinking maybe they're not just dreams, because, I mean, they're so vivid and everything, and we know what happened to Cisco, of course. And Barry says he has a really terrible idea, and I thought that was really cool. So then we get this flashback, which at first I thought was a flash forward. I thought this was showing what happens to Barry in the future because we see Iris and it looked like it was more of the future, but actually I thought it was really interesting because we actually see what happened the day that Barry, went to a coma. Those years that Barry went into a coma, we finally find out in this episode what actually caused that. And I mean, we know what caused it, but what actually happened before, how he got to Star Labs, which is something that we never actually got answered, and we see here, and it just makes Wells and Joe's, the whole storyline make a lot more sense here. So we see Doctor struggling to save Barry, and Wells comes to Joe and offers to take Barry to Star Labs to save him. You can see that Joe's really hesitant about it, and he's not really sure if they should do this, and Joe's thinking back at this because he feels like he is the one that caused this. He feels like he could have prevented all this, and I thought that was really interesting. It really made us care more about Joe's character, which I love seeing. So they decide to try and develop a way for Cisco to convince Wells to confess to Nora's murder, which I think was awesome that we saw that they were going to do that, and I thought that was an awesome plan overall. And here's the thing, as we know, Cisco is going to become Vibe, and we actually see Cisco become Vibe in this episode, which was awesome. And they basically decided to try and develop a way, basically they develop lucid dream goggles that will help Cisco, and I love the joke when Joe's like, oh, that's how you get him to shut up, because yeah, Cisco doesn't show up and shut up, and basically while they're working on some of the finer points, Wells enters, and that was insane, because they make it, the whole episode, whenever Wells enters, I had no idea if he was going to know what they were doing, if he was going to know their plan. I really did not know what was going to happen in this scene, and basically, they make up the story about how it's all for the public good, rather than for a specific job, and he troubleshoots it for them, giving them a way to communicate with the dreamer from outside the dream, and I thought that was really good. I thought that was just a really well-done scene, I have to say, definitely, especially because Wells, the whole episode, you just don't really know if he knows what they're doing, and I thought that was just awesome we saw that. So, basically, Wells calls Barry, and, basically, we don't know what's going to happen, and he gives them this whole thing with Captain Singe yelling at Barry for being behind on a deadline, but then wanders off distracted by wedding planning. And basically, he tells Barry never to get married, and Barry then turns around bumping into Iris, and they have a brief exchange before Eddie pulls Barry aside and reveals he plans to propose to Iris. And Iris tells him to call her when they're done for something work-related, and Eddie's upset that Joe didn't give his blessing, and recruits Barry to find out why, which, I mean, that was probably the best thing to do. And Barry, basically back at Joe's house, Cisco enters his dream, and this scene was amazing, I have to say, especially because Cisco's been getting all this, silly stuff this season, and the only, really serious thing Cisco's had is his death. So, to see this, I thought was just so satisfying overall. Something that a lot of people have been saying is that Cisco, while he's a great character, he's really just there for comic relief. And this episode showed that, no, Cisco's not just there for comic relief. He is there because he has a good storyline. Honestly, this episode gave him an awesome storyline, and I can't wait to see what else they do this, because I just thought this was awesome what they decided to do with Cisco, honestly, and if they want to keep doing this, I mean, this is awesome, and if this is, what Vibe's gonna do in the show, I think it's gonna be really awesome overall. So he enters his dream and starts narrating back to them what dream Cisco is doing. And it's basically the same exact thing from the discard reality, up to when Wells killed him. And they learned there that his name is Eobard Thawne, and that Thawne didn't plan to kill Nora. Of course, they find this out. And when Wells kills Cisco, he wakes up screaming, and he, says it felt so real. Even though he knew it wasn't real, to him it felt real. So as they finish it, Wells calls and asks Barry where they are. And the second that happened, like, oh shit, they're gonna get caught, because I thought Wells knew something. However, we find out that there's actually this fire at a high-rise where Captain Singe's fiance works, and Barry rushes over as the Flash, but it's too late to prevent an explosion, and I know some people might say this episode didn't, kind of detracted from the rest of the episode, but I feel like this episode was just showing that even though Barry's involved in all this, he still has to be the Flash, and he still has to, he still has to, make it seem like he doesn't find Wells suspicious. He has to seem like, Wells is his mentor and everything, and I thought it was really good that we saw this, because basically, and honestly, he's an awesome scene, because he creates a vacuum by rotating his arms at super speed, sucking the air out of the room to kill the fire, and on the street below, Singe and his fiancée reunite, and Barry rushes back to Star Labs there, where Wells is waiting for him, and Wells asks why Barry was doubting himself, and tells Barry that he needs to get out of his own way. And before he leaves, Barry tells Wells that he couldn't have done any, and I thought this was a great scene because, I mean, we know that Barry can't trust Wells, but Wells really does give him great advice, even when he knows that Wells isn't, a nice guy, someone he should trust. Wells is giving him, like, the best advice ever here. Basically, before he leaves, Barry tells Wells that he couldn't done any of this without him, and Wells says that he feels the same way about Barry, and I thought that scene there was amazing, and I love what Barry says. He talks about how it's so strange that he has to, even though he knows who Wells is, he can't get over, he has so many moments of just random kindness, and he doesn't want to, he doesn't know really how to react to him. Barry tells Joe that they have to recreate the scenario from Cisco's dream in order to force a confession from Wells. And Joe blames himself for letting Wells take Barry from the hospital in the first place, saying they need to be a better protector for Cisco to basically prevent what happened to Barry. And I like that Joe did tell Barry that. That's definitely something I love about the show, is that they don't let characters hide things for too long, which is something I thought was definitely very well done that we saw. I definitely thought that was really good. So at Star Labs, Cisco has reversed the force field to prevent a speedster from getting in rather than out, and the plan to force a confession, record it all, and then Flash will move in. So they send Eddie to keep Iris safe, because obviously they can't let Iris know any of this, and while Barry's talking to Joe about Iris, she texts him a 911 call, as he calls, to come see her, and he runs to her, and this I thought was really interesting. I thought she was going to tell him she loves him and everything, but that's not what happens. She talks about and I thought Iris actually wasn't annoying in this scene. I know a lot of people don't like Iris and don't really think she's a good character, but things like this, I think this is really good for her character, honestly. I want to see Iris get more of this stuff, because she gives him a file about the particle accelerator explosion. She has figured out that that's what caused the metahumans, and she says she thinks Star Labs knew about it, and that's how the Flash got his powers, and Barry says that he was affected by the explosion and doesn't have powers, and he tells her that he'll read over her file and talk about it later, and then leaves. So I thought that was really good overall. I definitely enjoyed that scene, and of course, you know that eventually Barry's gonna tell her. Just that scene, it seemed like Barry was gonna tell her, and she flashes back to when he was in the coma and was talking to him, trying to wake him up, and she tells Barry about her relationship with Eddie starting up and begs him to wake up, and she touches his hand and gets a little shock, and it just shows how that all started with her and Eddie, and I thought that was really well done, I have to say. I definitely really enjoyed that. I just thought that was all really awesome. So, at Starlab, Caitlin sends Wells to the bunker to see what Cisco has learned. He wheels down to the room to confront Cisco, takes his glasses off, and basically says the same exact thing that he did in the previous reality. And I thought Cisco was going to die in the scene. I really thought that was going to happen. And they have a similar conversation from before, but not quite the same. They do manage to get to something along the lines of a confession, but the force field doesn't keep Wells out of the staging area, and he readies himself to attack Cisco, but Joe then shoots at Wells, and Barry stops 2 or 3 of the bullets, but the third strikes and kills Wells, and I'm like, there's no way that Wells is dead. There's no way that there's no way that actually happened. And this, I thought, this just made me love the episode even more than I already was, because Barry's mourning their chance to free his father from prison, and Wells turns into Hannibal Bates. Hannibal Bates. I'm not kidding. And the shapeshifter from last week, of course, who can turn himself into anyone he wants to, and now it makes sense why they introduced his character, because obviously this was Wells' plan, was to introduce Hannibal Bates, get Barry to know who he was, and then fool him. And honestly, it's genius what he did. I never thought that Wells was this capable of fooling Barry, but he really was, and it's awesome that Wells did that to him. I mean, it's not awesome what he did, but Wells is a fucking genius, I have to say. After that, he is a genius, and I loved seeing that. I thought that was definitely probably the highlight of the episode. So Wells calls in, gloating that he figured out their trap all along. It was all a trap for them, and Barry tells Wells to kill him if he wants, but confess to the police and get Henry out of jail. He promises Barry that they'll face each other soon, and Barry just says, then face me now, the awesome line from the promo, and he rushes to the time vault and sees that Wells is watching them everywhere. He suits up, and that I thought was really creepy, but it does make sense, of course. So he suits up and rushes to find Iris, and she's on a bridge walking with Eddie, who's about to propose to her, but Joe, and basically Reverse Flash, though, takes the ring away from Eddie, and there's a moment where you think that Reverse Flash is just going to kill Eddie. I mean, I honestly thought in that scene that something bad was going to happen to Eddie, and Joe calls, but Eddie asks her not to take it, and Basically, he knocks Eddie aside, then prepares to kill Iris, and when the Flash rescues her, we get probably the best cliffhanger the show has given us, because it's a very subtle one. The Reverse Flash takes Eddie, and Barry tells her to go home, they'll take care of everything, and as he leaves, she now knows that Barry is the Flash, and that, I thought, was awesome. I mean, ever since Barry came back from when he time traveled, by mistake, ever since that happened, he's been wanting to tell her, and the way she found out, I thought was awesome, that he didn't have to tell her, that she just found out on her own. This is how I wanted Iris to find out. I wanted her to find in a very subtle way, not just Barry telling her. This is what I wanted. I wanted Iris to just find out on her own, and I love that she found it on her own. That was an awesome scene and so worth the wait, definitely. I mean, so worth the wait. I absolutely love that. That was such an awesome way to end the episode. So, Reverse Flash, though, that's not the end of the episode, though, because we get this really awesome post-credit scene, because Reverse Flash basically reveals the truth about his family lineage to Eddie, and basically tells him that they're family, and that he's insurance, and I'm like, what are you talking about? In flashbacks, we see that Wells watches over Barry, and he's in his coma, lamenting the fact that he has to create the Flash to get home, and he tells comatose Barry that nothing is forgiven, and he promises that he will die, and that's how the episode ends. So where we're heading next week, I don't really know, and I love that I don't really know. I mean, so much happened in this episode that I didn't think was going to happen. I didn't think Iris was going to find out that Barry was the Flash in this episode, but that was so worth the wait, I have to say. I thought that was awesome that she finally found out, because it's about time she did. Seriously, we've built up to this so much that I'm so happy that Iris finally found out. How is she going to react to this? I really don't know how Iris is going to react to this. But as I said, my favorite part of this episode is the twist that Wells, honestly, is just the biggest genius ever. Because who would have thought that Wells knew how powerful, he knew how powerful Hannibal Bates was, so he used him to basically make it seem like they killed him, but it was really decoy, and he knew their plan all along. Now, how did he watch them all the time? That's really what I want to know. How did Eobard Thawne watch them all the time? I don't really understand that, and I guess we'll see what happens, but basically, we then see, I mean, I thought that was just really interesting overall, and I love what they did with Cisco in this episode, definitely seeing what's going to happen with Cisco. Cisco's in danger, I have to say. I mean, now that, pretty much he knows everything, it's not going to be Wells being nice to Barry. That whole thing is over. It's now going to be this fight against Wells, which honestly is awesome, and I can't believe we're finally at this point. I mean, this episode, after they found out, after Wells found out what happened, it already feels like a different show, and it's a better show, and I love that. I'm not saying The Flash wasn't a good show, but just missing that's what's been missing from these episodes, and I thought that was awesome that he finally found out who they were. I'm sorry, that was really bad grammar. Who they were. I thought that was awesome. So, let's talk about Eddie. Of course, Eddie, Iris didn't listen to his proposal, but what is going to happen? Is Reverse Flash going to possibly convince Eddie to work with him? There's no way Eddie's going to do that. He knows who Wells is, but is Wells going to be convincing enough to get Eddie to work with him? I could kind of see that happening. I mean, just knowing, how good Wells is with words, and how, honestly, how much you can listen to him, and how good of a speaker he is, I could kind of see him getting Eddie to fool him into working with him. I could definitely see that happening, and it's not going to happen. I don't really know what's... Sorry guys, I hit something. I really don't know what's going to happen, and I don't really want to know what's going to happen. I think it's awesome that we don't know, and that was just... I thought that was awesome that we saw that. My other question is Iris. How is Iris going to react now to knowing that Barry is the Flash? What's she going to do? I mean, I'm really interested. How's Joe going to react? Obviously, Joe didn't want her to know. How's Eddie going to react? I mean, I definitely feel like she's not going to tell a lot of people, definitely. I don't think Iris is going to go public with this. I think she's going to try to keep this under wraps. If she does, Barry's probably going to tell her, you have to keep the secret under wraps, obviously, because, she does have to do that. And I don't know if Barry can convince her to do that, but that's what Iris has to do, even if she doesn't want to. She has to do what she can to keep that secret under wraps, and we'll see what happens there overall, because I thought that was awesome. I love finding out that Joe met Wells before when Barry was in the coma, and he caused Wells, that's what caused Wells and Barry to work together. I thought that was really awesome, and I'm really wondering what's actually going to happen, because I really don't know what's going to happen the rest of the season. Next week, Gorilla Grodd is back, which is going to be awesome, and now Wells is going to use Gorilla Grodd on Barry, and then, he's going to need Arrow and Firestorm to actually help him stop Wells, which, honestly, the direction we're heading is going to be awesome. I really love the direction we're heading. It kind of just seems like they're both building up armies at this point. Because, Wells doesn't really Wells definitely has a bigger army than Barry. I mean, Barry has Caitlin and Cisco, Joe, and Eddie. But who does he have that has powers? I mean, he doesn't really have anyone. He needs him. He needs Arrow. Arrow doesn't, obviously Oliver doesn't have powers, but he needs him. He needs Oliver. He needs, Firestorm. He needs those people that are powers and someone that can fear, they can fear Wells. And I think that's awesome. And of course, if you do remember, Oliver did know who Wells was. So I'm wondering how that's all going to work out. I mean, it just seems like it's going to be a really interesting final half of the season. I can't wait to see what happens, and I absolutely loved this episode because of the constant tension in it, honestly. So much constant tension in this episode that I loved. I thought that was awesome that we saw that. I mean, all the constant tension was so great. The Cisco memory scene might be one of the most intense scenes we ever had on the show, and the scene where, Cisco can run to Wells, this was my heart. I was, like, pumping the whole episode, and I love that. I love that I really didn't know what was going to happen, and I mean, Caitlin does have stuff to do in this episode, but she was the only character that didn't have a lot to do. She does have stuff to do, though. She's helping them with their plan. That's really what the show is now, and I love that. It honestly is turning out to be like the originals in some way. I mean, it's never going to be to the extent the original is still 10 times better than The Flash, but it's starting to be just like building up armies, and that's awesome. If this show just turns into Let's Get Wells, that's awesome if they do that. I mean, I'm not saying I don't love the whole metahuman thing, but you know what I just thought of? What if Wells used all those metahumans just to turn them against Barry? I mean, if he did that, that'd be awesome. Just knowing what he did with Bates, I kind of feel like he did that with all of them. Weather Wizard, Captain Cold. Captain Cold, I know, is going to end up helping Barry, but all the other metahumans that they have locked up in that prison, what if he ends up releasing all of them and actually using them against Barry? It could be really cool if that happens, and I could definitely see that happening. Honestly, that could be an amazing twist if Wells actually does do that. Can he do that? I don't know, but just knowing how powerful Wells is, I could definitely see it happening. But overall, guys, this is my review. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I know there was a lot of stuff I said in this episode, but let me know what you guys saw this episode. I thought this was overall by far the best episode of the season. I absolutely love this episode. I cannot wait to see what next week's episode holds. This episode was just so perfect, honestly. Everything I've wanted this season was in this episode, and I love that. And I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be my review for tonight's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which looks just as crazy as The Flash. So I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.